famous Lily Logan. Married her, bought the island, and built this place for her.
Sounds most romantic.
Poor Johnny. He thought by cutting her off from the rest of the world, he could hold her.
But of course the fair Lily tired of her ivory tower and escaped.
Indeed. Johnny went back to Wall Street, earned a few more millions, then sold the place.
And here we are. Well, I ought to go and find Mrs. Owen.
It would be quite rude to leave me here, all by myself.
Would it? Oh well, I do wonder where she is.
I'll get some punch. I'm rather dry.
This is exciting. Where's Mrs. Owen?
Mrs. Owen has been detained in London, miss. She won't be down until tomorrow.
Tomorrow? But
I have a list of the guests arriving if you would like to see it.
thank you. It seems silly to have brought only us in the first boat and the rest in the second.
That was design, not accident.
Design? What do you mean?
I suggested to the boatman that there was no need to wait for any more passengers. That 5 shillings soon set up the engine.
Oh, you shouldn't have.
It's a miracle I made it here alive. My hair may never recover. Wizard place you've got here.
I'm Mrs. Owen's secretary. Mrs. Owen has been detained in London, I'm afraid. It won't be down until tomorrow.
Too bad.
May I introduce Captain Lombard, Mr.
Marston! Anthony Marston. Oh, and how could I forget to introduce the lovely Miss Anna Marston.
Wife?
Sister.
Drink?
Wonderful place you've got here.
I'm Mrs. Owen's secretary. Mrs. Owen has been detained in London, I'm afraid. It won't be down until tomorrow. Mr.
Davis. Davis is the name.
My name's Lombard. Mr. Davis, Mr. Marston.
Nice to meet you, Mr. Marston. Bit of a stiff climb up here, but what a view. Reminds me of South Africa, this place.
Really? What part?
Oh, well, you know, the tall Durban.
Really well. Here's to temperance.
Do you, know South Africa?
Me? No.
Well, that's where I come from. That's my Natal state.
Interesting country, I should think.
Oh, yes. Finest in the world. Gold, oranges, silver, diamonds, everything man could want.
How do you do? General Mackenzie, isn't it? I'm Mrs. Owen's secretary. Mrs. Owen has been detained in London, I'm afraid, and won't be down until tomorrow. May I introduce Captain Lombard, Mr. and Miss Marston, Mr.
Davis. Davis is the name.
Can I get you a drink? There seems to be tea and punch.
Tea, thanks. You in the service?
Formerly in the King's African Rifles. Too tame for me in peacetime. I chucked it.
Pity.
Where is Mrs. Owen?
Miss Brent, isn't it? I'm Mrs. Owen's secretary. Mrs. Owen has been detained in London, I'm afraid, and won't be down until tomorrow.
I see. Did she miss the train?
I expect so. May I introduce Captain Lombard, General Mackenzie, Mr. and Miss Marston. I think you all met on the boat. Oh, and Mr.
Davis. Davis is the name. May I take your case?
Do let me get you a drink. Some punch?
Tea.
Tea.
I suppose you know, young man, that you left us standing there on the wharf?
I'm afraid, Miss Brent, I was to blame for that. I wanted to...
I find it most extraordinary that Mrs. Owen shouldn't be here to receive her guests.
Perhaps she's the kind of person who just can't help missing trains.
That's what I reckon she is.
Mrs. Owen isn't the least like that.
Perhaps it was her husband's fault.
She hasn't got a husband. I should like to go to my room.
Of course, I'll take you there.
You'll find Mrs. Rogers upstairs, miss. She will show you to your room.
Our host and hostess haven't arrived yet, sir. My name's Lombard.
Mine's Woolgrave. How do you do?
Davis. Davis is the name. Wonderful.
at 6 and 7s with the Owens not showing up. Let's go and explore the island before we dress for dinner.
How wizard! Isn't it just?